Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today I'm going to work on a classic. Actually, it's an updated classic. It's the Mitchell 300A, which was the reel that came after the 300. Had some changes to it, but for the most part, the internals are almost identical to the 300 series from the technology. Had an upgrade on a carbon graphite spool and another paint scheme and the like, but for the most part, internally, they're identical. So I don't normally do the Mitchells from a video standpoint because I think there's some outstanding videos on the YouTube already, particularly from the Mitchell Museum. But sometimes I do these videos to document the work that I do for a customer, and that's what we'll do here. And we'll also show you the Mitchell 300A. So this one came in for some service. It's running a little sluggish, and we'll take it apart completely. We'll show you how to clean the reel and how to do an annual service on it and how to restore this reel to a smooth functioning reel. I like to start with the side plate, and to do that I remove the handle first and then the 3 side plate screws. Now it's always a good idea if you're working on an older Mitchell, maybe like this one. This one's a 3000 and you see a lot of junk around the side plate screws. It's not a bad idea to spray them down with some penetrating oil and let it sit so that you don't risk the possibility of breaking a screw off in the side plate, at which point that would be problematic for everybody involved. So in this case, these don't look that way and they're turning very freely, so I'm just going to go ahead and take these out. But don't be afraid to go ahead and do that. And there are 3 side plate screws here. That's typical of all of the Mitchell 300s. Like I said, the design really didn't change too much over the course of this reel, which was around for about 50 years in various forms, but essentially that was manufactured for quite some time there, which is why when people ask me if they're collectible, they really aren't, because there were so many of them made. Okay, once we have the 3 screws out, we can take the side plate off. It comes with a little trim gasket there, which is new to that series. And yeah, it's time for service. These are just loaded with old coagulated grease, and that's probably why this thing has been bogging down as much as it has. So we'll go ahead and we'll change that out. As I mentioned, there are some changes. The drive gear for the spool gear here is a different setup, but not terribly difficult or different than the originals. All right, I'm going to pull the spool off while I'm at it as well. I'm putting these pieces into my parts trays so that I can get at them when it's time to reassemble and I know where they are. Let's pull this down, and lots of cleaning going on here then. First we're going to pull that secondary drive gear out that's going to drive the pinion gear. And I'm going to use some cotton swabs and paper towels to take the majority of this grease off. And then we'll go ahead and clean that. Maybe I'll probably put this into the ultrasonic cleaner just because it's so jammed up here. Next off then would be there's a anti-reverse friction clip reel, part of the reel here. This should all come out together. You lift up the main gear, you can get that clip out, and again you can see there's a lot of grease inside here. This friction clip is very similar to what you see on a lot of reels. This grabs the main gear and acts as a brake to pull it forward and backward as friction is applied. And if it's not working on your reel, you can pinch these close, and it doesn't take much, just to close the gap a little bit to help that perform better. Then we can remove the main gear. The main gear, of course, has got a lot of junk on it as well. I'll pull those off. Again, I'm going to use cotton swab. That's a good idea. And then I'm going to just put this in an ultrasonic. Just to now, if you don't have an ultrasonic, you can use a series of. You can use everything from dish detergent, some penetrating oil, toothbrush, wire brush, so on, to clean in all those little crevices there where this is all accumulated. For me, I have that ultrasonic cleaner, so we'll put that in. Get rid of the body here. Come on over to the transition gear. Again, another pile of grease here. And the old grease tends to accumulate contaminants, and over time that becomes a problem. If it's got sand or salt or seawater in that, and you just want to make sure that you get it all cleaned up. This part is not changed on the reel. Most of the Mitchells run on that slider system, and it has the 3 little tags that come off the back of this, and we'll show you how those go back together in a bit. Next up then we have the slider, and the slider is what holds the main shaft in place. The axle shaft, you can see it going up and down as the slider goes up and down, and as you come underneath here to pick it up, you're going to notice that there's a stud or a nipple underneath here. That goes into a hole in the axle shaft. A little stud there goes into a hole in the axle shaft, and that's what holds the axle shaft in. So once you pull that slider off, you can get to the grease on the axle shaft. Then what we have is the internal of the body here. Just going to turn that over to get a fresh piece. We have a slider here. That slider is held in by 2 screws. We'll clean off most of this. And I like to take that off. Some people don't take that off, but when I look at something like this that's got all this grease in here, then I'm concerned that there's some coagulated grease behind this slider, so I like to take it off. There's 2 screws, 1 on each side. And then you can pull off the slider. And as I mentioned, there's typically a lot of junk under there that some people want to take a fast approach or leave that in there. I much prefer to do that, taking that off. And then we can clean the rest of the body out with a paper towel. And get all that residual grease and that out of there. So this one's okay in that regard. We'll come up top. Now Mitchell makes a special tool. You don't have to have it to work this reel, but if you have one, it makes it a little bit easier. It's a deep socket essentially with a bar coming through it to grasp it, but also to act as a screwdriver. That'll take the head assembly off. So just simply put that in there and give it a turn. Once you loosen it, I like to remove it by hand from there. And the reason for that is you don't scratch that trip plate assembly underneath. Again, that's going to go in my parts tray. And then you can remove the metal plate here that acts as the trip lever. Now it's on a little bit of a groove, so it's kind of got to bring it up evenly. And you got to be careful with it. It's only an aluminum plate. Sometimes you got to, there we go. Okay, oops. And this little hook on that side actually is what drives to close the throw mechanism here. So I just wanted to take that off. Now we can pull the head assembly off, and there's a little shim here. Don't lose that little shim in your case. That little shim is going to be the difference between that where that gear assembly sits and the other gear that meshes in here. And we'll just took that off so that we can get a better cleaning on this. And again, if you need to, you can use a toothbrush. Here's a hard plastic brush. Just use something to clean the teeth of that pinion gear. And then on this one, I'm going to just put this right back because there's no real service required here other than making sure that's clean. We'll come in here, we'll put a little bit of grease on the teeth to restore it. I'm going to put that right back onto the shaft so that I don't lose that little bearing slot. Next up will be the two little shim washers that went onto the pinion gear. And we can put this in. Now this has got a slot in it, so find the slot and you can put the little tab here into that slot to properly seat this as such. Then you just want to bring that washer around, or I'm sorry, that nut, and tighten that back up. Now I'm thinking as I put that down, I really didn't put a drop of oil onto the throw mechanism there, or trip mechanism, trip lever. And I'll show you how to do that if you didn't want to disassemble this. Okay, and you just snug this one up. You don't tighten it all the way. You want to make sure it spins nicely, which it does. So if you didn't take it off, look for the hole here in the plate. Just rotate that until you can get to the trip screw, and then just use a real oil, and that'll just be sufficient to lubricate that area. While you have this out, you might as well put a stream of oil onto the bail sides and under the nut there, just to let that soak in. So that's the cleaning on the bottom. We've got a nice spinning reel here, and that'll be ready to go from that service. Okay, we're going to pause the video here. I'm going to go put those parts into the cleaner. When I come back, we'll reassemble the bottom of this wheel. Alrighty then, so we just put these through an ultrasonic cleaner. As I mentioned, it doesn't take much. You can do this by hand, but if you have one, you'll find that it works wonders on cleaning everything up nicely. So we've done that, so let's go ahead. It's time to reassemble then. The first thing I want to do then is get the slide, and I'm going to make sure that we have some grease on the back of this, especially where the axle shaft is going to ride, which is right in that center core there. The rest of it will sit up against the case. It's not that important, but the axle will slide up and down here, so let's get some of that on. The notch goes low, and then we can align the two holes here and grab the two screws that belong in those holes. Not my strong point, small screws and holes. We've got one. We'll get the other. Okay, and then it's just simply a matter of rebuilding the reel then from this point. Oops, didn't get that one in. Try that again. There we go. Alright, once we have that in, then we can just reassemble the balance of this. Next up then is the axle shaft, which has been cleaned. We want to make sure we get some lube on that. So I like to just put some of the real grease on here, and then I use my gloved hand to kind of spread it around, giving it a nice even set. This goes flat side down as such, and then you want to grab the slide mechanism here. I'm sure there's fancy names for them. I don't know the names. There's a hole in the axle shaft where that stud sits. Okay, and now the next up then would be the planetary gear. I believe that's what it's called. I'm going to get some on the back. Also going to get some in the teeth. And this one's always tough, but I believe that the answer is if you bring this up to the top and you find the three, the one lines with the hole in the shaft, one in each corner then. If you don't have it right, it's probably the other way. It probably is all the way down. Let's try that one. There we go. And you have to test it to make sure that you have the full swing on this, and that's the way it's operating properly. So put the point, put it all the way down, put the point here and one of the protrusions on each side into those slots, and that should work for you. I'm just going to put a little bit more of that blue grease up top here where it's sliding. Folks ask me why I don't use a brush. I guess that's just personal pick there, but I don't use the brush. And then we have the next setup then is the side case. So we can go ahead and put the anti-reverse lever onto the main gear. You want to put a little bit of the grease on both sides. Then I'm going to put the slide, which is that forked piece, over it. Just notice there's a little bit of grease left over here that I didn't fix, just because I want to put some new grease on that. And you also can put the grease onto the shaft of the main gear. And again, if you're working with a gloved hand, just kind of spread that around. And then we just want to put both of these in. We want to put the main gear in, and then we want to align the hole on the anti-reverse. To that. There we go. So this is your anti-reverse, and again, as it spins forward, no problem. And you can see as you return it this way, it locks the anti-reverse with that friction slide. So forward, no problem. Reverse, locks it in. Okay, next up then is that transition gear here. Again, we want to make sure we have grease on both sides. And you want to get some in the teeth. That'll work its way around. Make sure that you have a nice coating there. And that goes up top here. Locks in. And then this is the drive for the pinion gear. So again, some nice oil, grease there. On that, a little bit on the slot characteristics, and then this is the drive mechanism for the power side. Once we have that up, then we should be complete. Simply need to put this back in place. Oops, we forgot the so used to working on the 300s without the gasket, and I forgot the gasket. Okay, line that up. Line the holes up then. And we have 3 side plate screws. Some folks ask, can you oil these? Should you grease the screws? You can. That would prevent corrosion in the future. I don't typically do that, but you can. Especially on saltwater reels, you should. If you're taking the cross parts off of like a pen reel or something, a conventional boat reel that's got subject to a lot of spray, absolutely you should take the time to put some grease or a drop of oil in the holes. That certainly will help to retard any kind of corrosion. Alrighty, this is essentially the overhaul of the Mitchell 300A. We just want to put the handle back on, put the spool back on. We've already oiled up the bail there. Okay, snug them up. You don't have to over tighten them, especially with that gasket that you got there. Let's put that handle back on then. grab the spool. The spool looks like it's in good condition. If you wanted to service the spool, you could pull the drag adjuster knob off. There'll be a spring under there, which is the spool spring. You'll have a Teflon washer here. If you push this through, you should have a Teflon washer below. And as long as those are in good condition, there's really no problem there and anything that you need to go ahead and go do. So just go ahead and put that back in. That spring assembly back on. Tighten it down. But they're Teflon washers, so they don't get lubrication, so you're fine with that. So a lot of times you'll see nobody will even go in there. Okay, there you go. There's the Mitchell. Oops. Extra turn there. It's working from an anti-reverse. You have an anti-reverse override that you can use that enables you to backpedal the reel. And we have that friction anti-reverse that we had talked about it going forward. So that's the Mitchell 300A. It's a little bit different than the 300, but not terribly. If you can do the one, you can do the other. And I recommend that you do this service about once a year. In this case, this reel has not seen service in a while. We could tell that from the age of the grease and the way it was coagulated on there. But overall, those Mitchells will last a long time with just a little bit of service. And it's a service that, as I showed, basically anybody can do, so long as you have a couple of minutes and some patience. That'll be a welcome outcome for you to make sure that it works properly. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like it and subscribe. Always looking for more subscribers, so please tell your fishing friends as well. And this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.